Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a world where nightfall doesn't just signal rest, but a quiet, fierce battle for survival. It's the Middle Ages, a time when the cold of winter could be as deadly as any sword, and sleep, something we take for granted, was a hard-won prize, fought for with every scrap of ingenuity and resilience. Here at Boring History, we don't just dig up facts. We pull you into the raw, unfiltered reality of the past. So, grab a warm drink, maybe pull a blanket close, and let's step into a 13th century village, where the wind howls outside a fragile hut, and inside, a family prepares to face the night. This is the story of how medieval people slept through brutal winters, and why their way of resting might just have been wiser than ours. The medieval night was a different beast from what we know. There were no glowing screens, no electric heaters, no soft mattresses to sink into. When the sun dipped below the horizon, the world turned dark and unforgiving, and for most people, peasants, farmers, the heart of society, sleep wasn't a simple act of lying down. It was a calculated struggle, a nightly ritual shaped by the need to stay warm, stay safe, and make it to morning. The first thing you need to understand is that sleep wasn't one long, unbroken stretch like it is for us today. Instead, it was split into two distinct phases. Pattern historians call biphasic sleep. After a grueling day of plowing fields, tending livestock, or weaving cloth, families would gather in their homes as the last light faded. The fire in the hearth, if they had one, would dwindle to embers, casting a faint glow. They'd settle in for the first sleep, a deep, heavy rest that began shortly after sunset and lasted about 4 hours. This first sleep was a lifeline. It was the body's chance to recover from the day's toil, to sink into a kind of primal rest that feels almost alien to us now, surrounded as we are by artificial light and constant noise. Around midnight, sometimes a bit later, people would wake naturally. This wasn't strange or disruptive. It was just how life worked. This wakeful period, often called the vigil, was a quiet, almost sacred time. The world was still, the fire low, and the darkness seemed to press in closer. Some would use this time to pray, whispering Pater Nosters or Ave Marias in the dim light, believing God was nearest in these silent hours. Others might stoke the fire, patch a worn cloak, or sharpen a knife for the next day's work. In some homes, neighbors would slip in, sharing stories or planning for dawn. Medieval texts from France and England call this the hour of the soul, a moment of reflection and intimacy, far from the bustle of the day. After an hour or two, people would drift back into their second sleep, which carried them through until the first rooster crowed or the sky began to lighten. This biphasic rhythm wasn't just a quirk. It was woven into the fabric of medieval life. Modern researchers, like historian Roger Ekirch, suggest this pattern might be more natural for humans than our modern single-block sleep. Without artificial light to stretch the day, our bodies naturally fall into this divided rhythm. It wasn't until the industrial age, with its streetlights and factory schedules, that we forced ourselves into one long sleep. In medieval villages, though, this two-part rest was the norm, a way of living in harmony with the night, finding meaning in its quiet. As the fire's embers faded and the cold crept closer, these people weren't just sleeping, they were carving out moments of peace in a world that offered none easily. The places where they slept were as far from our cozy bedrooms as you can imagine. For most peasants, there was no such thing as a separate bedroom. The idea of a private space for rest was a luxury for the wealthy, and even then, it wasn't private in the way we think. The average family slept in the main room of their home, the same place where they cooked, ate, worked, and lived. Picture a small hut, its walls made of wood or wattle and daub, a thatched roof leaking in the rain, and an earthen floor that turned to mud when the weather turned foul. Along the walls, you might find wooden benches or planks where people slept. If there wasn't enough room, some would curl up on the dirt floor, with only a thin layer of straw or hay to soften it. The bed itself was a far cry from what we know. Straw or hay, stuffed into coarse sacks, was the standard. Maybe you'd have an old cloak or a scrap of rough canvas to cover it, but that was it. The wealthy might have mattresses filled with sheep's wool, but for most, It was just a pile of straw, unchanged for months, turning prickly and damp by winter's end. The spot by the fire was the warmest place in the house, reserved for children, the elderly, or the sick who needed it most. And here's something that might shock you. People didn't sleep alone. Families were packed together, and animals often shared the space. Chickens clucked in the corner, goats bleated, pigs snuffled nearby. Their warm breath helped keep the cold at bay, turning the hut into a shared cocoon of body heat and survival. Privacy was a foreign concept. Husband, wife, children, grandparents, even livestock, all slept shoulder to shoulder, their bodies pressed close to conserve warmth. There were no walls to separate them, no doors to lock. The boundaries between private and public were defined by unspoken rules, a quiet understanding born of necessity. In the dead of winter, this closeness wasn't just practical, it was life-saving. Bodies warmed each other better than any fire, and blankets were scarce. Most families made do with homespun cloths, old clothes folded in layers or, if they were lucky, a sheepskin. Even newlyweds slept among the others, maybe with a thin cloth draped for a hint of privacy. This was sleep as a collective act, a shared fight against the night, where every breath and every body mattered. The cold was the real enemy, and winter made it merciless. Without modern insulation or heating, homes were barely warmer than the outdoors. The wind slipped through cracks in the walls, the floor was damp, and the fire, if it was still burning, offered only a small circle of warmth. To survive, people slept in the same clothes they wore during the day: tunics, woolen shirts, tight pants, even boots. Undressing meant freezing, so every layer stayed on. Boots were crucial, protecting feet from the damp, cold floor. In some homes, people didn't change clothes for weeks, waiting for the rare bath day, if it came at all. Every piece of fabric was precious, patched and restitched until it fell apart. To fight the cold, families turned to ingenious solutions. One of the most common was using hot stones or bricks, heated in the fire and wrapped in rags to avoid burns. These were placed at the foot of the bed or tucked into the straw, radiating heat for a precious hour or two. In Northern Europe, this was practically a ritual. Children got smaller stones, women might use two, and men made do with whatever was left. These stones didn't just warm the body. They dried out the damp bedding, which was critical in homes where moisture seeped up from the ground. Some families placed hot stones in pots near the headboard, creating a makeshift heater for the night. It wasn't luxury, it was survival, a testament to the resourcefulness of people who had so little but made it work. This way of sleeping wasn't just about staying warm, it was about staying alive. The night was a time of closeness, where the sounds of snoring, creaking wood, and crackling embers wove a familiar tapestry. Silence wasn't necessary, warmth was. In that warmth, there was a kind of kinship, a reminder that survival was a shared effort. As the cold pressed in and the fire dimmed, medieval people found ways to outsmart the night, to carve out a few hours of rest in a world that offered none easily. Their story is one of endurance, of turning necessity into something almost sacred, and it's a story that carries us deeper into the heart of their lives. The deeper we go into the medieval night, the clearer it becomes that sleep was more than just closing your eyes. It was a craft, honed by necessity and shaped by the harsh realities of winter. Imagine yourself in that same village, the air thick with the smell of smoke and damp straw, the faint glow of embers barely holding back the chill. You're lying on a bed of straw, the cold seeping up from the earthen floor, and you're not just trying to sleep. You're trying to make it through the night without freezing or falling prey to the dangers lurking in the dark. Let's explore how they turned this struggle into an art. From the makeshift beds they slept on to the rituals that guarded their dreams. The bed itself was the first hurdle. For most peasants, it wasn't a piece of furniture but a patchwork of whatever they could scrape together. Straw was the foundation, piled on the floor or stuffed into sacks made of coarse linen or hemp. Over time, it compacted into a hard, prickly mass, full of dust and insects. If you had a sheepskin or a scrap of homespun wool, you were luckier than most. It added warmth and helped keep fleas at bay, at least for a while. In some regions, like Scandinavia or Slavic lands, people built low wooden platforms called bedsteads near the stove to capture its lingering heat. These were raised slightly off the damp floor, with burlap or rags stuffed between the boards to block drafts. In southern Europe, where winters were milder, peasants might sleep on stone benches covered with reed mats or sheepskins. For babies, mothers crafted burlap cradles, hung from beams to keep them safe from rodents scuttling below. Blankets were another improvisation, pieced together from whatever was at hand. Most families used old clothes, cloaks, or grain sacks, folded or sewn to trap heat. In wealthier homes or monasteries, you might find thicker woolen fabrics, dyed dark to hide stains and give the illusion of warmth. But for peasants, a blanket might be a patchwork of scraps, each piece a reminder of hard times. In the north, animal skins, goat, wolf, or bear, were prized, their weight and warmth a shield against the cold. Women treated these skins with salt or herbal tinctures to preserve them and mask their musky odor. Some families used straw mats as a top layer, not for comfort but for insulation, creating a crude but effective barrier against the chill. In the coldest months, they might sew long cloth sleeves, stuff them with hay or wool, and wrap them around their bodies to seal in heat. Sleeping was a group effort, and that's something we can hardly imagine today. Families didn't just share a room, they shared body heat. Parents, children, grandparents, maybe even a cousin or two, all pressed together on a single platform or pile of straw. Their warmth pooled, fending off the cold. Even animals played a role, goats or pigs in the corner, their breath adding to the room's meager heat. In the harshest winters, families might bring puppies or lambs under the covers, their small bodies a precious source of warmth. There was a saying in some villages, "Share your shelter, and winter won't take you." It wasn't just practical advice. It was a belief that survival depended on closeness, on sharing every scrap of heat. This lack of privacy extended beyond the peasant hut. In castles, women, sisters, aunts, governesses might share a single room, their beds separated only by curtains. Warriors or retainers slept in barracks-like quarters, stretched out on benches, side by side. Medieval morality didn't see this closeness as shameful. It was just life, a necessity that forged a quiet bond. The night wasn't just cold, it was dirty. Straw beds were havens for fleas, bedbugs, and rats. Shaking them out helped, but only so much. Folk remedies like burning juniper or wormwood were used to fumigate the house, but pests always returned. Bathing was rare in winter, seen as a health risk, so bodies carried layers of grime and sweat, attracting more insects. Sleeping in a room with a sick person was dangerous, but there was no choice. Space was tight and illness spread fast. Church records note the heartbreaking frequency of childhood deaths from fevers or suffocation, a stark reminder of how fragile life was. Adults slept lightly, alert to the rustle of rats or the itch of a flea bite. Sleep wasn't peace. It was vigilance, a quiet battle against the threats hiding in the dark. And then there was the spiritual danger. The medieval night was a realm where the rules of the day didn't apply. Demons, witches, and restless spirits were believed to roam, held at bay only by faith and ritual. Families prayed before bed, reciting pater nosters or sprinkling holy water. Protective herbs like St. John's wort were placed at the head of the bed, and iron crosses were nailed to doors. The time between the first and second sleep, from midnight to 3 a.m., was especially feared, a liminal hour when witches were said to fly to their Sabbaths and the dead might return. Some left bread on the windowsill as an offering to lost souls, hoping to keep them at peace. Night watchmen patrolled villages, carrying crosses and saying prayers aloud, their presence a small comfort against the unseen. Sleep was as much a spiritual act as a physical one, a test of courage in a world where the night held secrets we can only imagine. As the night wore on, these rituals and routines wove a fragile shield against the darkness, binding families and communities in a shared fight for survival. The medieval night wasn't just about rest. It was about holding on, about finding warmth and meaning in a world that offered neither freely. Winter sharpened the stakes, turning every night into a test of endurance. Picture a January evening, the snow piling up outside, the wind whistling through gaps in the walls. Inside, a family huddles together, their breath visible in the dim light of a dying fire. They're not just fighting to stay warm, they're fighting to stay alive. The hearth was the heart of the home, but even a roaring fire couldn't warm every corner. Homes were flimsy, wood or wattle and daub walls, thatched roofs that leaked, earthen floors that turned to mud. Windows, if they existed, were covered with shutters or rags, and doors were sealed with cloth or straw, but the cold still crept in. The bed, whether straw, a wooden bench, or a raised platform, was the first line of defense. Straw was stuffed into sacks or spread across the floor, layered with old cloaks, sheepskins, or bundles of grass. In wealthier homes, woolen mattresses were a luxury, but even these grew damp and pest-ridden without constant care. Keeping warm was a constant battle, and people got creative. Hot stones or bricks, heated in the fire and wrapped in rags, were a staple. They were placed at the foot of the bed, tucked into the straw, or held close to the body, their warmth a fleeting reprieve. In northern regions, this was a nightly ritual. Children got smaller stones, women might use two, and men took what was left. The stones didn't just warm the bed. They dried the damp straw, crucial in homes where moisture seeped up from the ground. Some families placed hot stones in pots near the headboard, creating a makeshift heater. In monasteries or wealthier homes, metal warmers filled with coals were used, but for peasants, stones were the reliable, no-cost solution. A smooth river stone or a broken brick could mean the difference between a restless night and a few hours of rest. Clothing was another weapon against the cold. People slept in their daytime clothes, tunics, woolen shirts, pants, boots, because undressing was unthinkable. The floor was damp, the air icy, and every layer was a shield. Boots protected feet from the chill of the ground, often loosened but left on, ready for a midnight trip to the barn. Clothes were rarely changed, maybe once a week on bath day, and every piece was patched until it fell apart. Families layered everything: old capes, sheepskins, sacks, creating a heavy cocoon. In the north, animal skins were treasured, their warmth unmatched despite their smell. Women treated these skins with salt or herbs, a folk craft that turned necessity into skill. Sleep was a communal effort, never more so than in winter. Families crowded together, their warmth pooling to fend off the cold. A single blanket might cover everyone, with children tucked between parents like cocoons. Livestock, goats, pigs, chickens, added their breath to the room's heat. In the coldest months, families brought puppies or lambs under the covers, their small bodies a vital source of warmth. The folk saying, "Winter won't take you if you share your warmth," was a reminder that no one survived alone. Even in castles, privacy was rare. Women shared rooms, warriors slept in rows. This closeness wasn't shameful. It was life, a bond forged by necessity. Winter also brought dirt and disease. Straw beds were magnets for fleas, bedbugs, and rats. Folk remedies like wormwood smoke or vinegar helped, but pests always returned. Bathing was rare, seen as dangerous, so bodies carried grime that attracted more insects. Sleeping with a sick person was risky, but space was limited, and illness spread fast. Church records note the tragic frequency of childhood deaths from fevers or suffocation, a grim reminder of life's fragility. Adults slept lightly, alert to rats or flea bites. Sleep wasn't peace. It was a quiet battle against the threats in the dark. The night was also a spiritual battleground. Darkness was a realm where demons, witches, and spirits roamed, held at bay only by faith. Families prayed, sprinkled holy water, or placed St. John's wort at the bed's head. Iron crosses were nailed to doors, and protective cloths hung over windows. The midnight hours were feared, when witches were said to fly and the dead might return. Bread was left on windowsills to appease lost souls. Night watchmen patrolled, their prayers a comfort against the unseen. Sleep was a test of courage, a spiritual struggle in a world where the night held secrets we can barely fathom. As the winter deepened, these rituals and routines became a lifeline, a way to hold the darkness at bay and carry the family through to morning. In the darkest times, war and famine, sleep became an almost impossible dream. Imagine a village under siege, a battlefield strewn with weary soldiers, or a family hiding from raiders in the dead of winter. Sleep wasn't just a challenge. It was a fleeting hope, a fragile act of defiance against a world determined to break you. Soldiers on campaigns slept where they fell, on rocks, in trenches, or leaning against trees, still in their armor. Chronicles from the 100 Years' War describe men sleeping upright, swords at their sides, ready to leap up at the sound of danger. The cold was brutal, the ground unforgiving, and hunger made rest even harder. An empty stomach didn't just keep you awake. It made sleep painful, a shallow drift interrupted by cramps and shivers. Many died from exhaustion, their bodies giving out before a blade could touch them. For peasants caught in war's shadow, sleep was just as elusive. Burned homes and stolen food left families with nowhere safe to rest. They might flee to the woods, sleeping under shelters of branches and rags, their bodies pressed together for warmth. Fear of raiders, of screams in the night, made deep sleep impossible. Villagers took turns keeping watch, allowing others a few minutes of rest. In besieged cities, people slept in short bursts during the day, a fractured rest that barely sustained them. The lack of shelter, combined with hunger and cold, turned sleep into a desperate act, a brief pause in a world of chaos. Famine made things worse. Hunger gnawed at the mind, making rest fitful. In lean years, when crops failed or were seized, families went to bed starving, their bodies too weak to fight the cold. Children were the most vulnerable, often falling ill from malnutrition or exposure. Church records note the heartbreaking frequency of deaths from nighttime suffocation or fevers, especially among the young. Sleep wasn't recovery, it was endurance, a fight to reach morning. Some burned herbs like lavender, hoping the scent would calm their nerves, but even that was a luxury. Elders in villages worked to maintain order, ensuring the young had some rest to keep the community going. Sleep became a symbol of resilience, a small defiance against the forces that sought to break them. Rituals took on new meaning in these times. Prayers before bed were a lifeline, a plea for protection. Soldiers carried herb bags, hoping the smell would ease them into sleep. Chronicles describe warriors finding solitary rest between battles, their bodies collapsing from exhaustion only to wake at the slightest noise. Sleep wasn't natural. It was a forced luxury, filled with fear and anxiety. Yet, in this struggle, medieval people showed a strength that's hard to fathom. They didn't have our comforts, no soft beds, no safety, but they had a stubborn hope, a resilience that carried them through. This story of medieval sleep isn't just about rest. It's about survival, about finding warmth and meaning in a world of hardship. Every night they survived was a victory, a testament to their ingenuity and courage. They turned stones into heaters, bodies into blankets, prayers into shields, and maybe there's something we can learn from that. In our world of endless distractions and artificial light, we've lost touch with the night's quiet wisdom. Their sleep was a reflection of their lives. Hard, uncertain, but filled with hope. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the medieval night. If this glimpse into their world moved you, drop a comment below. Tell me, could you survive a winter like they did? Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more stories from boring history. Let's keep exploring the past, one night at a time.